Hi, I'm Nicole Lind and I make sea glass and beach pottery jewellery under the name of Tilia by the Sea. I've been collecting sea glass for over 10 years all along the Scottish coastline. I'm going to show you some of my special beach finds and I'm going to look at Scottish beach pottery in more detail. My husband and I live in Scotland, the Kingdom of Fife, close to St Andrews. The Fife coast has over 500 miles of coastal path and many beaches. What's it like to be sea glassing in Scotland? Well, we have what's sometimes called 4 seasons in one day, so you can find yourself at the beach in the glaring sun and 5 minutes later it could start to hail. You have to be prepared for that. Then we also have really rough seas. And the North Sea is typically only about 10 degrees, which is really cold. Some brave souls do swim in it. But the nice thing about this is that the rougher the sea, the better the collecting. So in winter time, the best finds get churned up. Things like shooter marbles you can maybe find in the winter. So that's the best time to come to Scotland. It is going to be cold though. Each beach has something different to offer. Some beaches yield large chunky pieces of sea glass, others smaller, more rounded pieces, and others again have many shells or sea pottery. Each tide will change the beach completely, and sometimes instead of pebbles and sea glass, you might find only sand and very little sea glass. Here's a handful of beach finds from the Fife coast to give you an idea of the things you can find at our beaches. On a good day, you can find sea pottery, maybe a clay or a cod marble, a stopper, or a little bead. You can also find a couple of pieces of blue sea glass and maybe some pirate sea glass. Okay, so we've seen the kind of things that you can find where I live, but one thing that we haven't really gone into detail about is sea pottery, and I'm really passionate about this stuff. So let's have a look at the Scottish sea pottery and its background and history. We are going to focus on the period between 1835, when sponge ware was invented in Scotland, until the 1930s when production ceased. There were around 50 potteries on the west coast in the Glasgow area and at least 10 potteries all in on either side of the Firth of Forth, around the Edinburgh area and on the Fife side. These were the largest and very busy potteries, but there were also smaller potteries further up north all the way up to Aberdeen. Potteries in Scotland began mass production in around 1835. Workers were moving from place to place, from factory to factory, up and down the coasts. Children as young as 10 were called half-timers, and they were also working in the potteries. Coal was used to fire the kilns, and you needed 12 tons of coal just to fire one kiln. Now we're talking millions of teapots and plates that were produced in just one factory on the east coast of Scotland. Of course, with mass production comes waste. Now, what did the potteries do with their broken piece of pottery? Back in Victorian times, it was quite normal to actually just dump the broken pieces of pottery nearby on beach dumps. That's lucky for us today, because twice a day the tides come in and out and they wash the pottery back and forth and they make it really nice and smooth. Broken pieces turn into really smooth, lovely pieces of pottery that we can now collect by the beach. Where I collect, there is a little river and you can actually hear the pottery in it, and it sounds like the river sings. There's a little clinky sound and you can see the pottery pieces and you can wade through the river, and every now and again you maybe find a really nice lovely piece of pottery that might have just been taken out to the North Sea. What you can also find are kiln supports. Now, what are kiln supports? That's these little triangles and other bits of kind of pottery that you can find, and they were used inside the kilns to stop the pottery from sticking whilst they were firing the plates and teapots. And now you can find these little really sturdy pieces of kiln stones and I personally love to collect the little pyramids most. When the production was in full swing, the export market was really huge, and if you've ever found a piece of spongeware on your beach on the other side of the world, it's likely that it might have been produced in Scotland. Pieces were exported to the US, Australia, South Africa, Canada, Cuba, and a lot of these countries didn't actually have their own production. There were a couple of factories in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey who produced spongeware in 1880. Now, what I thought was really cool was when we were in Sydney and I saw a couple of pieces of pottery in a museum, and they are the same kind that you can find here on the Five Coast. Now, sometimes you might find a piece of pottery and it has a maker's mark on it. Now, these are really rare, and although you might find a piece that has a London maker's mark on it, it's actually the distributor who put it there, and it might have been a piece of Scottish spongeware. So that's the mystery solved. Why do you find a piece of spongeware on a US beach and it looks exactly like the pieces in Scotland? It was probably produced here. Pottery production in the time that we're talking about wasn't always continuous, and there were also major social disruptions. There was the First World War, it was followed by the Depression, and then the miners' strike. Now, the miners mined the coal that was used to fire the kilns, and when they went on strike, a lot of the pottery that was made for big orders couldn't be fired, which meant that all the orders had to be cancelled. And in the time space between 1928 and 1932, all the potteries on the Five Coast and beyond closed. We had a look at the history, and now we're going to have a look at patterns and printing techniques. In the years before plastic, almost all household items were made from pottery. The earliest pieces of spongeware were made in Scotland around 1835 and subsequently copied in neighbouring countries. It was made until the 1930s. Scotland, England and Holland were the main exporters of spongeware. But what is spongeware? The firm root of a marine sponge was cut into basic shapes or tied to form a particular shape. The sponge was dipped into colour and repeatedly pressed onto plates, teapots and other everyday tableware. Think potato printing. Some pre-made sponge shapes were purchased from a large manufacturer, which explains the similarity in patterns all over Scotland and beyond. It's relatively quick to produce and apply and has a homely charm. Most patterns are actually spongeware with a hand-painted finish. These are spongeware examples that you can see here. Another finish you're likely to find at the beach is transferware. Transferware was made with transfer printing. The design was etched onto a copper plate, transferred to tissue paper, hence the name, and then rolled onto the item. Some patterns were made and printed at the potteries, other designs were bought in. There were hundreds of transfer patterns available at the time. The famous willow pattern was made by at least 10 potteries in Scotland. Patterns were rarely named at the time, and most items didn't have maker's marks on the bottom. But one of the few named patterns that was named is called Gretchen, mainly made in grey, but also in blue, brown, crimson, lilac and navy. It was made by several potteries in both sponge and transferware. I have found several pieces in grey and have tried to recreate a plate. So we had a look at transferware and spongeware earlier, and I told you about different types of patterns, like there's a blue willow pattern and the Gretchen pattern. Now, what's really interesting is that you get lots of geometric patterns here, and they tended to be on the borders of items. And I find it really fascinating that you can really see how the sponges were applied to the pottery to get the patterns. There's also lots of floral patterns here. They're all different types of flowers, but you can find some things that you can find different shards and they have the same pattern. So that's really fascinating for me when you find a pattern that matches another one that you maybe found a couple of years ago. And there's also this cute little bow here that I've got a grey and a red piece of, so you know that the same sponge was used for different colours. We looked at patterns and printing techniques earlier. Now, what kind of colour can you expect to find on the beach? Most likely you're going to find a lot of white pottery, followed by what was the most popular colour at the time, that would be blue pottery, and then it's getting rarer and rarer. So there's going to be green, brown, a little bit of red, and one of the rarer colours is purple, and then it's probably yellow. I think I only have about 2 pieces of yellow pottery. Some of the rarest finds and also the most exciting ones are if you find a piece of white pottery and you turn it around and it's a pictorial piece, which has this one has half a lady on it. So those are the finds that are really, really exciting. Here's a selection of some of my best finds from the Scottish coast. Now there's a little gaming dice here. It is plastic, but it's a really cool find. There's some beads here that you can maybe also find. It's even a bit of kind of heart-shaped one. Shooter marbles, really rare stopper. Nice piece of amberina. And this is one of my most treasured finds. It's this little Czech cracker charm. It was probably a cat or a little duckle. I like to keep my finds in these Art Deco jars. So what I really like to do is I like to collect these pottery bases, teapot bases, also found at the beach, and I put these stoppers or marbles on them. There's a bit of clay marble and the cat's eye marble from the beach, and you can have these all dotted around the house, and it's really nice way of reusing waste materials to make cute little displays. It's been great talking to you, and I really enjoyed showing you my Scottish beach finds. Bye!